Hi there, I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Gothi of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas. I'd like to welcome you to Weaving Words. This is a show where I share some of my storytelling. Sometimes it's excerpts from the Eddas, some of the stories of the gods, sometimes it's from the sagas or from folk tales of Northern Europe and Scandinavia. Today's is one that I wrote myself. This is the third chapter in the Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson. Now, the first two chapters are available on my channel. You can go back and look at those now. I recommend you do before you come into this. It's not necessary, but it does help to flesh the characters out some. Those would be Arna the Ashlad, that's chapter 1. And then chapter 2 is Niels Bjornsson, Yuletide Carol. So, those two stories set the stage. Now, in the first story, you heard of Arna the Ashlad and how he, spoiler alert, bested the troll on winter nights, and how he experienced his supernatural dealings that night. Now, this story is a bit of a precursor to that. This takes place about, the springtime before. So it would be the same year, but it's that spring. It's coming up on the spring festival. So, just to kind of give you a time frame of what we're looking at. This is the story of Hilde and Rev. It has been told how Arna the Ashlad bested the troll on winter nights. Now we turn back the clock a tick. We go and look at young Hilde. You may recall that Arna had the help of a fox, a friend of Hilde. This is how those two met. It was the springtime of the year of the Night of the Troll, some months before that winter nights. It was the day of Livga, which is the spring festival, celebrating Idunna and the returning of life to the world around us, breathing of life back into Midgard. The family at Bjornstead was preparing their grand festival. And little Hilde, she was being a nuisance. She was bouncing around, in and out, just couldn't be tied down. So her mother sent her off to the woods because she couldn't handle her. Go play in the woods. Now, it's often been said that little Hilde has more of the wild in her than human. She is one that is constantly seeing after animals. Everything from chittering little squirrels to broken deer to broken winged birds. Whatever needs her help, she is there for. She's a healer, but she's a friend of the animals. She is a friend of the Vaettir. Now, she's too young yet to understand this. She's not yet 8 moons. But she's still well beyond her years in maturity and wisdom. She's not afraid of anything. And she is as rambunctious as they come. So off to the woods she goes. Now, the sun is high that day, and she is sitting beneath a tree, chittering away with a little squirrel that she swears can understand every word she says, when out of the corner of her eye she catches a flash of motion. Quickly she looks, and she sees a fox dashing away into the woods. Now, this fox has got a little bit of a limp to it. It's obviously injured, and she's worried about the fox. So she rushes after the fox to try and see if she can help it in any way. Well, she darts through the woods, and the fox is just tearing along. And at length, he leads her down a winding path. And this winding path twists and turns, and by this point, she's lost her way. She doesn't know where she is in the woods. And all of a sudden, the way opens up on a ring, an open ring within the woods. And around the edge of that ring are toadstools and stones. It kind of has an eerie feeling to it. Now, Hilde's mother would call this a fairy ring. But Hilde's too young yet to know of such things. She just knows that she's a friend of the animals and the spirits in the forest. Now, the fox darts into an opening at the base of this giant oak tree. And as he does, he disappears into the shadows. So Hilde rushes after him and ducks under the tree and into that hollow, trying to follow him along, because she cannot stand the idea of this fox being injured and her not being able to help it. She's not thinking of her own safety. She's not thinking of finding her way home or any of these things. The only thing that she is concerned about at this point is finding that fox and helping that fox. Very one-track mind. Well, finally, this little tunnel through the tree, which seems much longer than it should, opens up, and she finds herself once again in the same fairy ring that she was in before. And this baffles her because she swears she was just here, and it can't be the same on both sides of the tunnel. As she looks about her, it takes her breath away. The colors are more vibrant. The sounds echo just a bit. There's an eerie, otherworldly feeling. Animals flit by, but there's more than that. There's pixies and nixies. Huldra. Skogra. There are all kinds of hidden folk. Little gnomes running about. And she is amazed. She is in love. This is wonderful to her. And there she sees, leaning against a tree, nursing his wounded ankle, none other than the fox that she was following. Now, there was something different about the fox. Because before he was just a normal little fox, but now he stood nearly as tall as her brother Nils, and stood on his own 2 feet. And he held in his hands a silver egg. Now she had seen the fox carrying something in its mouth when she was following him, but the only thing that she was worried about at the time was healing him. Now she's here and sees him, and sees this egg. It catches her interest, but she's still worried about the injury. So she comes up and introduces herself to the fox. She tells him her name and her family, and she offers to help. Now the fox makes to dart away, but he stops. There's something about this girl that's off-putting. There's something strange. Wait, she's not supposed to be here. She's not supposed to be on this side of the veil. How did she do that? So he chooses to give her a moment and see what this curious little creature is all about. He introduces himself. He tells her that his name is Rev, and that he doesn't have very much time because he's on a mission to take this egg back to the Fox Lord, Svixemi. It's something that he must do, and he must do quickly, because he must gain the favor of the Fox Lord. She doesn't like this news at all, because she needs to find her way home, but she insists first that he let her heal him. And so she does. She sets about, because he finally agrees, she sets about building a poultice, like her mother had taught her. She grabs some of the herbs and everything around. She grinds it up, puts a little spit in it to help break down the herbs. And then she makes a nice pack and puts it on his wound. And then she begins to sing a little song. And she sings a song of the fates. She sings a song of an injury made whole. And in a flash, the fox's leg was healed. Now this baffled him. How could this have fixed his leg? No one knew these charms anymore. These were lost to the ages. Wise women like this had been lost from the woods ages ago. How could this little girl, this little human whelp, know of these charms, know of these healing rites? He was even more fascinated. He needed to know more. So he tells her that he will take her home, but first she must follow him to the Lord of the Foxes, because his time is running short and he must get there by nightfall. If she will follow him, then he will turn around and bring her home as soon as he's done. Now the fox is a wily one. He never really had any intention of bringing her home. He knew good and well that any human being that was brought over the veil stood no chance of going home unless they were escorted back across the veil by a Vaettir like himself, because humans like her had no place in this spirit realm. This wasn't a place for her. So he agrees that he will take her back, but she must follow him. And she agrees because she has no other choice. So on they go, until they come to a den in the middle of the forest. It looks more like a little hole in the ground with a slight glowing ember to it, like there's a firelight inside. And so they duck in. It's just a little foxhole. She expects it to be dank and dirty inside. and to be far too close-knit for herself. But if this giant fox can get in there, then surely she can too. So she follows him into the den. And once they enter into the den, she's amazed, because what looked like such a little den from the outside was immense on the inside. There was an entire city in there, bustling with foxes of all shapes and sizes. As she looked around, she saw that there were little foxes that were just like the foxes that she knew on the other side. They didn't seem to talk so much. The little foxes seemed to follow around these larger foxes, like Rev, the ones that walked around on 2 legs and who could speak and use their hands. She was amazed by this. So she followed along, and she's just awestruck by this giant underground city that's so much larger inside. At last they come to the fox lord Sviksemi. And she just thought she was in awe before. Her eyes glisten with wonder for this giant fox, this monstrous fox, easily 10 times the size of any other, was seated on a throne made of brambles and thorns. And the little foxes would bring food to the bigger foxes, who would then lay it at the feet of Sviksemi. Sviksemi would then lick the head of the fox making the offering, and then that fox would go back and do the same for the little ones that had brought the food to it. As she watched and learned, Rev waited in line for his chance to see the Fox Lord. At long last, Rev finally gets his audience, and Sviksemi looks down on Rev. He looks at the egg, and he becomes furious. He begins to rage, growl, bark at him. How could Rev have been so stupid? How could he have made such a mistake? That egg was the egg of Kunandi, the queen of the owls. And by stealing it, Rev thought to win Sviksemi's favor. But instead, what he had done was unwittingly brought about war between the owls and the foxes. For that egg, being the queen's egg, was the heir to the throne of the owls. This would not stand. Sviksemi dressed down Rev for his behavior. Sviksemi explained to Rev that this was his fault, this was his doing. But nonetheless, Sviksemi, as Lord of the Foxes, was responsible for Rev's behavior. He was responsible for Rev's actions, and Rev had brought dishonor upon the entire Fox clan. And if he wanted to keep the foxes from war, and to save the lives of their clan, for they were no match for the owls in this forest, Rev would have to pay shield. He would have to pay recompense. He was to take the silver egg back to Kunandi and deliver it to her. But that wasn't going to be enough. There had to be something else, something added. So, Sviksemi took out a root, and he carved on it some runes. And then he breathed a spell over the root, and the runes disappeared. He handed this root to Rev, said that this was his task. He was to give this to Kunandi, and then he was to uphold whatever her request was after having read the runes. It was about this time that Sviksemi noticed the little human cub, Hilde, watching the whole time. So he questioned Rev about this little human child, what she was doing on this side of the veil. He asked Rev what trickery he had been up to, for now that the girl was on this side, there was no way she could go back without a Vaettir guide to get her past the doorway. Mortal men and women were long since locked out of this world. Only a few wise men and women were able to send their souls across, to step out of their bodies, send their hammer across the veil, to explore the realm of the Vaettir. But mortal men and women in physical form were never meant to come over. Only the foolish that follow the hidden folk in the woods, that are lured in by Skogra or by other fey folk in the woods can cross that barrier, but they never go home. 3 days and nights is all they had before they could not go home anymore, for their physical body would begin to break down. And he explained this to Hilde and said that she must be gone within 3 days, and that he would see to it that she would find her way there. But she first had to help Rev with his task. For Sviksemi did not trust Rev not to betray him. He knew that Rev would be looking out for his own good. So Sviksemi sends Hilde along with and says, if you will go with him, I will honor this and I will make sure you get home. So Hilde stands up for Rev and says that the Fox Lord does not know what he speaks of. The Rev has a good heart and that he will see this through. And so she follows along with Rev, and they set out at first light to deliver the silver egg to Kanandi, the Owl Queen. Now Rev explains to Hilde as they go that in order to get to the Owl Kingdom, they had to cross across 3 territories first. The first was that of the hogs, and then they had to get past the stag. And after that, if they were lucky, they could sneak past the wolves. He wasn't sure they were going to be able to pull it off, so he warned her, whatever you do, do not speak out, do not do anything without my okay. Follow my lead and I will get us there safely. Meanwhile, Rev was thinking to himself the whole time that at the first sign of any kind of obstacle, he would sacrifice the girl and save his own hide, for he had no intention whatsoever of going down to any of this. They set out, and they come at last to the first territory. It's a deep fen, a swamp area. It's a river bottom that runs through the forest. It's marshy land, full of roots and nut trees, and bugs everywhere. Swampy, nasty ground. And there, miring in the muck, having a wonderful time, was a herd of hogs. Now as Hilde looks on, she sees the little hogs running around that look like just the hogs at home. Nothing out of the ordinary there. And then she sees one of the larger hogs. This large hog was walking through, and he was easily 4 times the size of any of the other hogs. He was huge, he was massive, and there was an intelligence about him. He seemed to command the other hogs, the littler hogs, and they would bring food to the bigger hog, and he seemed to protect them and look out for them. So as they watch and they see, Hilde then sees the most awe-inspiring sight she's seen yet. Easily 10 times the size of the bigger hogs, this massive boar comes walking out of the swamp, lifting himself out of the waters and the muck and the mire, covered in weeds and mud. This giant hog lord looked down, his snout the size of a tree trunk, sniffing the air, and he begins to squeal, and he looks directly at Hilde and Rev. There was no sneaking by this one. The hog lord lets out a bellow that shakes the earth. It sounds as though the thunderer had struck his hammer on the mountain itself. And then he addressed Hilde and Rev. He challenged them and asked what little morsels were walking through his forest and thought that they could come through his swamp without being his meal first. Rev immediately starts to think, and he spins a tale as to why they need to come across, what they need to do, and he begins to tell his deception to the Hog Lord, because he knows that the Hog Lord isn't going to let him go just because he says, hey, I messed up, I need to get this egg back to the Owl Queen, will you let me pass, please? No, he needs to make it seem in some way that the Hog Lord is all important, and that he had to come here in some way to appease him and pass. But before Rev could get anywhere with his story, little Hilde steps up. This pint-sized dynamo reaches into her satchel and pulls out a fairly large bag of truffles that she had rustled up from the woods earlier, before she followed the fox into the hole. She holds the truffles up to the Hog Lord and tells him that these are for him, to thank him for letting them pass through his area, for looking out for them and protecting them. The Hog Lord was taken back. It had been a long time since he had seen someone who knew how to offer, who knew what to offer. He swelled with pride, for someone knew the old ways, someone still honored the old ways. This little girl, this little human whelp, was honoring the Vaettir more than anyone had in quite some time, and brought a tear to the old hog's eye. He nodded and smiled. He said, "Yes, verily, they shall have passage to the other side of the fen. They shall even have one of his best hogs to ride upon, and that hog will wait there and travel them home." For despite the deception of the fox, for he expected foxes to be so cunning, he was truly impressed and touched by the offering of this little child. So pure, so true. And so Hilde and Rev passed through the hog's territory. And as they came out of the fen, they came into a big opening, field, a break in the trees. Deer everywhere, fawns, does, stags, all about, of varying sizes. And again, like the other Vaettir that she'd seen before, there seemed to be the smaller ones that were more akin to the deer that she knew back home, the larger ones that seemed more sentient almost, like lesser gods after a way. But she didn't see a grand giant deer like she expected to see after the fox and the Hog Lord. But she did see a group of stags and does all gathered around one felled deer who couldn't get up. Now Hilde, as we all know, cannot abide an injured animal. So she rushes out to see what is going on. And there is a stag, beautiful stag, ancient to look upon, truly awe-inspiring. And he has an arrow, a hunter's arrow, stuck in his haunch. Well, immediately, she goes to tend to the arrow. Now the stag bristles at this, brandishes his antlers. He doesn't trust her, because he doesn't trust humans. But Hilde took a supplicating pose, lowered her head, laid her hands out in front of herself, and slowly approached. She reached out and gently touched the arrow. And with deft fingers, she wrenched it free. Now, of course, the deer bellowed with pain, because it hurt. She saw the iron head of the arrow come out. She laid it to the side. She immediately went to packing another poultice, just like she had for the fox. And as she placed the poultice on the haunch of the deer, she began to sing a charm, much like the one that she sang for the fox before, for Rev. And almost instantly he is healed. Then the deer stands. And as he stands, he takes his full height. And he draws up, and he draws up, and he continues to draw up, and gets larger, and larger, and larger, until he seems to fill the sky. This was the Stag Lord. He bellowed out a bleating song, and lowered his head down to address Hilde. He thanked her for her healings, and he praised her for knowing the old ways. The iron arrow, loosed by the hunter, had caught him while he was visiting the mortal plane, while he had taken physical form. And as he had dashed across the veil, the iron in the arrow prevented him from shifting back to his full form. The poisoning metal promised to be his bane, if not for Hilde. So for saving his life, he honored Hilde and said that any one of his stags, any one of his does, her pick, would carry her clear of their land and would give her safe passage back. Hilde smiled and accepted the offer. Rev and Hilde were off again. This time Rev hadn't even had a chance to step up and do anything. Hilde handled it all herself. At last they come to the end of the deer's area. And as they reach the edge of the territory, the doe that she had chosen to carry them on stopped, bristled back, and would not pass into the next territory. So Hilde and Rev dismount and continue on. At this point, Rev warns her. They are entering the territory of the wolves, and this is no place for the meek. They should be quiet, and they should sneak ever so carefully, because if they did not, and they were caught, they would never see the other side alive. But before he could finish his explanation, the wily fox had gotten too loud. There was a pack of wolves upon them before they could know what to do. An easy dozen wolves around them, all brimming with beauty and power, snarling and snapping. Then the alpha of the pack stepped forward. Grand, giant, dire wolf, easily 4 times larger than any of the others. There was an intelligence about his eyes. And when he growled, he spoke. He spoke of the meaty little morsels they had found, and what an honorable gift this would be to their lord. The pack gathers up Hilde and Rev, carries them on. There they meet the wolf lord. The wolf lord, like the hog lord, like the stag lord, was awe-inspiring and terrible to look upon. But where the other two were grand and beautiful, the wolf was both fury and beauty. He was gore and life all at once. He was terrifying and awe-inspiring. The wolf lord looks upon this human cub, this meaty morsel. He says, "This makes a good offering. I shall enjoy devouring them." Rev at this point is fairly convinced that they have met their doom and that there's no way they will ever reach the end of their quest alive. But before he can even draw breath, once again, little Hilde steps forward and handles things her own way. That little tyke stepped forward in front of this giant, towering wolf, squares off with both feet, her hands upon her hips, her head cocked just to the side, and begins to chastise and berate the Wolf King. She chastises him for having interrupted their quest, for pulling them aside and treating them so barbarously. The Wolf Lord is taken aback. He doesn't know what to do with it. He hems and he haws for a second, and she continues on. She starts to wag her finger at him. He doesn't know what to do with this, so he growls and he barks at her as he regains himself and thinks, "I can't let myself look like this in front of my followers." So he snarls at her, snaps at her, and Hilde smacks him on the end of the nose. Bad wolf. He's flabbergasted. All he can do is laugh. A great, guffawing, deep laugh that sounds like a mix between a howl and a growl and a laugh. He's beside himself. He cannot believe the unmitigated gall of this pint-sized little dynamo who would smack the Wolf King in the nose. How do you process? What do you do with that? So he stops a moment and he looks her in the eye, his deep golden eyes staring at her, and he peers deep into her soul. He looks past the tiny little flesh bag exterior, and he looks and he sees the line of her people. He sees the line of mothers, one before the other, each with a touch of the sight, each with a touch of the gift. And he knows, and he smiles. And then he looks to his followers and says, this one has the heart of the old ways. This one knows no fear, and I like her. Because she made me laugh when none have been able to do so in centuries. She gets a pass. Let her go. My swiftest wolf will carry her through. And so she did. She leaped on the back of the wolf. Rev followed along. They tore off towards the tree. Meanwhile, the Wolf King simply laughs and lays back down. He's likely to never see her kind again. On the two sped. They race towards the edge of the wolf territory, and at last they come to the kingdom of the owls, a great and towering tree, like unto Yggdrasil itself. This tree encompasses so much of the sky that you can't see around it. Stairs lead up into the hollow of the tree. Owls line all sides. Grev and Hilde walk up the steps, climb up the tree, clutching the silver egg. So close, because each of the owls snapping knows what it is and is waiting for the moment they can rend Rev to pieces because he has stolen it. The only reason they don't is for fear of damaging the egg itself. At last, Rev makes his way up to the hall of Queen Kunanthi. And she was the most beautiful and awe-inspiring of the Vaettir lords yet. She was huge. She was wondrous. She was beautiful. She was owl, and yet she was so much more. There was no question in Hilde's mind at all that this was the goddess of the owls. She was wisdom. She was fury. She was hunter. She was beauty. All rolled into one. As she peered at Rev with tawny eyes, she clicked her talons and bade him speak. Rev immediately stepped up, claimed that the egg had fallen, and that he had found it, and that he had taken it back to his lord. But his lord told him where it came from, and without wasting a moment's breath, Rev had rushed it back here to return it to its rightful owner, thinking his cunning plan was going to work. The queen saw right through it. She snatched the egg from him and then threatened to eat him whole. Rev didn't know what to do at this point. He didn't have a way out, so he held aloft the root and said that his king, Svixemi, had sent this, and that it was for Queen Kunanthi. The queen took it, cast a spell over it, and began to read the runes. And she let a low, deep, eerie chuckle that shook the very bone, that chilled you to the core. It was the chuckle and the laugh of the gallows, of the one who knew that death was coming and welcomed it. She looked at Rev and said that his king had offered him up as a price to buy peace, to protect the foxes from the fury of the skies. and that she would take the offer. She would devour the fox, and that she would devour all of the foxes in kind, for it was a weak and meager offer. So she struck out, talons grasping at Rev, and then she stops cold in her tracks, motionless. None of the onlookers can tell why she has stopped mere inches from rending this vile cur asunder, until they saw the single outstretched hand of a little girl not 8 winters old, standing firm her ground, staring the owl in the eye, and simply saying, "No." The Owl Queen fell back. She looked at Hilde, really looked at her for once, saw deep into her soul, deep into what power this could be that pulled her back. What hold had this girl over her? Why? And she knew. She challenged Hilde and asked her what it was that she sought to do here. And Hilde said that the offering on the rune, of the runes on the root, was fair, and that the queen did dishonor to the owls in not accepting it. But Rev was good. Rev was true, though a bit conniving, and didn't know when to tell the truth often enough. But Hilde could not sit by and let anything happen to him. So she offered herself in his stead. A life for a life. Debt repaid. The queen considered this a moment. She eyed Hilde closely. And then she explained that Hilde's offer was good, and that she would take it. She would exchange Hilde's life for Rev's. But because of a debt that she owed herself, that life would be refunded. Confused, Hilde asked why. Kunandi explained that once, ages ago, a little owlet had flown over into the material world, into the mortal realm. It had gotten lost and fell afoul of a hawk and had broken her wing. There was a young girl who rushed out, shooed away the hawk, and took that owlet in, healed her, and then set her free again. That owlet would one day become Kunandi. For the Vaettir exist both in our time and out. Kunandi had been healed by Hilde's mother. And she owed Hilde's mother a life debt because of this. And as such, she would not harm Hilde. She could not harm Hilde. So while she accepted the exchange of Hilde's life for Rev's, she gave it back to honor that mother. She declared there would be no war, that the foxes could go in peace. But the one thing she did extract was that Rev was never to set foot in the shadow of their tree again. And that if he did, his life was forfeit. Rev, of course, accepted, because what else could he do? He rushed off. Hilde and Rev found their way back to the den of the foxes, and they told Svixemi what they had seen and what had happened. Svixemi was amazed, and he told little Hilde that only someone with a soul as old as time itself could know and do the things that she did in the way that she did. She always had a place with them, and that any time she wanted to come to visit, she was welcome. And then Rev himself stepped forward and told her, as he showed her back to that little hole in the tree, to cross the veil back into the material world. He told her that if ever she was in need, for anything, for any cause, she had but to call him. He handed her a necklace. It was a small fox's tooth on the end of a cord. He said, "You simply need to rub this and call my name. Holler it to the woods, and I will come, as quick as I can. Whatever you need, I will be there." And with that, Hilde and Rev struck a friendship that would stand the test of time. And this little girl, not 8 winters old, had traveled across the world of the Vaettir, seen the lords, seen the lessers, and had made her family proud. She passed back into the material realm. She had to have been gone 2.5 days at this point, with all the travel and everything. She was just shy of her 3-day mark of not being able to return before her physical body would break down. And when she came out the other side, she swore that her mother would be worried sick. There'd be search parties. But there wasn't. The sun was still high. It should be lower in the sky by now. And she just then saw her mother come across the field, calling for her to come home. It was time for the offering for Hilde. Not only had she not been gone 3 days, she'd been barely gone 3 hours in the material world. Hilde smiled, chuckled to herself about the magic of the woods. She clutched that little fox's tooth necklace around her neck and toddled off after her mother, tending to the eggs for the offering. And their Hilde was good. This, of course, ends the chapter of Hilde and Rev. Rev, we meet again, though unnamed, in Arne the Ash Lad. He's something of a guide for Arne. So this is how Hilde and Rev met. You'll also find in this particular story that I explore some of how I see some elements of the Vaettir and their hierarchy and how they work. This is not its entirety. It's far more complex than what I give here. This is just a little window into a couple of them. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. If you did indeed enjoy today's video, if you enjoyed this story, please give me a like on the video below. Give a comment. Let me know what you thought. Give me any kind of insight that you might have. Hit me up on the Facebook group, Word Weaver Productions. You can find me on Facebook. It's real easy, Word-Weaver Productions. You can follow me at Twitter at Eric_Sjerven, Sjerven. That's Eric with a C. And then you can also email me at esjerven@gmail.com. That's ESJERV as in Victor, EN@gmail.com. If you got any questions or anything like that, feel free to hit me up. So I do hope you guys enjoy these stories. I hope you continue to listen and explore these. The Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson, which, if you know anything about the sagas, a lot of times the sagas don't focus so much about the person they're named after as they do the tertiary and peripheral characters, the descendants and the predecessors, and then the actual person who's titled is like a segment of this story, because their saga is not just their story, it's the story of their family. So the Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson allows me to explore some of how I see heathenry, some of the elements that I see in the heathen world, both from a cultural element, religious element, spiritual element, all of these things rolled into one. Like today we got to explore the Vaettir. With Nils we got to explore Yule. We got to explore the Norns as tied to the family. Yule Father as an ancestral spirit tied to the family. With Arne we got to explore the kind of elements of basic folk telling with a very classic troll tale. So please continue to follow along. I intend to do more of these and put more of these out. I really enjoy these, and I intend at some point in time to put together one megalithic volume of the Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson, something I intend to work on over time. Each time I put one of these videos out, I have just written that story that week. So this one I wrote about 2 days ago, and just happened to type up and performed here. And By the time this video goes live, I will have already performed it for my tribe. They always get the first viewing, but then I put it up here for you guys shortly thereafter. So I hope you liked it. Hope you stay tuned. Keep telling stories. And if you don't have any to tell, go out and do something interesting. Come and tell me about it. Hail.